Hello, everybody, and welcome. Happy Future Friday. My name is James Darius Ball. It is my pleasure to be your host this afternoon as the director of the Future Cities Initiative. I am joined to welcome you by Eileen Fuchs, the executive director of the National Building Museum. Before she says hi, I love to kick it off with a fun fact. For those that haven't been to our physical space, we were originally built as the pension office. And therefore, we have some unique architectural features, including a low stairs that lets the veterans easily come up. So, with that, Eileen, let me turn it over to you to welcome everybody today.
I wasn't expecting such a fun fact on this Friday, and there's a rumor that we call tour lore the steps are actually that way because of horses going up. It's not true, but that just letting you know here. I'm Eileen. Just happy Future Friday. So happy to be here. So excited to welcome so many people into our amazing content and conversation, and to welcome so many returning folks. That there are a lot of you who have now been with us on this our third time here, and that says a lot to us. So we're super excited about that. So a lot to share, a lot to discuss today, and a lot to learn. So happy to have you all here. Back to you, James.
Thank you, Eileen. So, our topic today is cities of center resilience. For those that have been following along, we've been exploring cities as different areas. We've looked at them as engines of the economy. We've thought about how they are hubs of innovation. And today we are diving deep into them as centers of resilience. Future Fridays is a part of our broader Future Cities initiative. That is not possible without the support of our sponsors. So I just want to give a second to shout out and thank AARP, Rooted Communities, and Wayne and Ursula Quinn, who have already come on, and many others that are starting to come on to support this exciting multi-year initiative that is really starting today with all of you. So this is one of the key features of our Future Friday is that we want to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to participate. So please take a moment. You should be seeing a link to the Slido in your chat, and that might even pop up for you on top of the screen so that you all can log into Slido and introduce yourselves. Would love if you'd like to share who you're with, the city you're coming from, and if you would like to, I also just want to shout out that in Slido, you are able to reply to somebody else's comment. So if you see somebody introduce themselves that you'd like to connect with, please do. Please feel free to reply to that and start a conversation and be able to exchange and use this as an opportunity to even do some networking. So as you're introducing yourselves, I am going to swap over and introduce our panelists that we have joining us today. So if they would like to come onto camera, as I will start by introducing Victoria Salinas, who is the former Deputy Administrator of Resilience at FEMA. Victoria is a nationally recognized leader in resilience who has helped communities, businesses, and governments prepare for disasters, adapt to change, and build a stronger future. We are humbled to have you joining us and kicking us off on this webinar, Victoria. We also have joining us Olivia Rokutuvekau, who is the project manager and leads the municipal budgeting practice area within the internal management team at Bloomberg Associates. Olivia works with municipal governments on operations, governance, and systems improvements with a focus on disaster recovery, resilience planning, and community engagement. She has worked with a portfolio of North American cities as a liaison and advisor to member city governments, bringing resources to develop and implement innovative resilience strategies. And we have Corinne Rico, who is the Senior Director of Sustainability within the Global Sustainability Solutions practice at CBRE. And Corinne brings over 15 years of experience at the intersection of sustainability and the built environment to her clients, working collaboratively to provide solutions that integrate into existing frameworks and processes while maximizing sustainability impacts. Thank you all so much for joining us. For those that have been on before, you know that we always like to really have a well-rounded perspective on these topics. So each of you brings such an incredibly unique perspective, and I can't wait to get into the conversation as we get going. I would love to hand it over to Victoria, who's going to kick it off, set the stage for us. We think it is so important to bring this optimism to this topic because it really inspires and orients us to the work we want to do. And then we will go into our Dscast. So over to you, Victoria, and thank you.
Well, wonderful to be with you all. Thank you, James, for having me. And I've got to say, when you asked me to join you today for the dose of optimism, it felt very on point. I have been accused actually numerous times of being an unflappable optimist. So thank you for the invite and the honor to join you all today. So, as James was saying, most recently I served as the Deputy Administrator for Resilience at FEMA. I'm now on the board of ICLEI USA Local Governments for Sustainability, a senior fellow at University of Miami, and also doing consulting with a company called Teneo. But I think more importantly today, as we dive into the conversations, I hope that we all come to the conversations and the inquiry on the Slido, not both from maybe what we do, but also who we are. And so I wanted to kick off a little bit, sharing a little bit more about myself, because it really comes to play when we talk about our own stories, come to play when we talk about city resilience and really making sure that cities are centers of resilience. I am a daughter of a Chilean exile, political exile. He left Chile in the 70s because of a dictatorship. I'm also a mother of a university professor, or I'm a daughter of a university professor. Her last book before retiring was The Heart of Community Engagement, Practitioner Stories from Around the Globe. So you can see a theme here. And now I am a mother of two young boys and married to an entrepreneur. So I am surrounded by people, myself included, who are actively trying to be part of the narrative of their communities, people trying to create the futures that they want. And my hunch is that many of you are here today because you too are actively looking to help us all spring forward. We may sometimes, especially now, feel like we're slipping back, but the Latin root of the word resilience is actually about springing forward. So what is resilience? That's the topic today. This is what we're looking at. Resilience is that capacity of a city, of a person, of a system to anticipate, to withstand, to adapt and recover from disruption, while at the same time advancing equity, sustainability, and our individual and collective ability to thrive. Every single community, urban, rural, tribal, inland, coastal, has some level of resilience. And we're focusing on cities because this is a time of overlapping crises. Cities are on the front lines, they're dealing with new types of disruption, and they're also showing us what's possible. Cities matter so much to us as a planet because so many people also live there. In the United States alone, we've got 83% of Americans living in cities. Globally, it's almost 60%, set to climb to nearly 70% of humans in cities by 2050. So this is not just a demographic shift, it's really a call to action. So when we build resilience in cities, we're protecting people, we're unlocking innovation, and we're modeling scalable solutions. Cities have tools, institutions, private capital, community networks. They are truly where ingenuity and urgency meet. Cities also concentrate people, resources, ideas. They concentrate the strengths of so many different sectors and systems. They also have the power to generate what Judith Rodin called resilience value. That means that cascading benefits that arise when smart investments reduce risk and strengthen communities. So think about wherever you live. Think of the green space that might be being used to lower flood risk, that also improves mental health because you can take a walk there, that improves air quality because of the nature that's in it, and raises property values at the same time. That's the resilience value. And in cities, the potential to create that value is unmatched. So I'm going to invite you to imagine a few things as we get started today. First, I want you to imagine a city where after a major storm knocks out power, every resident, regardless of income or mobility, can walk less than 15 minutes to a resilience hub. The lights are on. If you have medicine that needs to be cooled, you can put it in the fridge. They've got meals to share, and neighbors are safely together. That isn't just an aspiration. It is something that Houston Texas is actively working on as part of their resilience strategy. They call them lily pads, and they're working to make sure that in every neighborhood, particularly the low income neighborhoods, people with mobility access challenges can walk to a place that will still have the lights on and be a resilience hub for them after another storm rolls through. I'm going to take you to another place now. Imagine a city where neighborhoods that were once labeled food deserts in a region affected by drought. Imagine that young people are transforming their communities through urban farming. They're cultivating fresh produce, providing it to their families, earning a living wage, pioneering sustainable agriculture methods like aquaponics to address the challenges like drought that they live with. Again, this isn't just a vision. This is something happening right now in Oakland, California, where you have over 150,000 pounds of produce a year being produced with 90% less water by groups like Planting Justice in East Oakland, one of the lower income parts of Oakland. I'm going to take you somewhere else on this journey for a moment. Imagine a city where downtown areas are safeguarded not by cumbersome sandbags that are super heavy if you've ever tried to lift them, but by sleek, removable flood barriers that can be deployed swiftly. In this city, communities don't just brace for the floods, they actively participate in resilience. Young people are trained in emergency preparedness. They come together when the forecasts predict flooding. They work side by side to make sure these barriers go up, and they're strengthened in making sure that both their infrastructure and their social bonds are as strong as can be. This is a community called Mount Vernon, Washington, where I had an opportunity to walk through this town with the mayor. They had historically been plagued by flooding from the Skagit River and relied on those labor-intensive sandbags. They are one of the first cities in the United States, and this was almost 2 decades ago. They pioneered an aqua fence, a Norwegian product that was the first one in the US, and it allowed for doing things more rapidly, deploying and setting up when those predictions said flooding were coming. But they didn't lose sight of something really critical, the social cohesion, the coming together as a community when their community was at risk. And so that today even remains a key part of how Mount Vernon tackles flooding. One last example here, because I'm sure you're all thinking of your own as well. Imagine a community rediscovering that the key to resilience wasn't in concrete walls or expensive seawalls, but something more natural, maybe something you couldn't see from the top of the water. Coral reefs just offshore. The coral reef once buffered storm surge, protected hotel districts, safeguarded downtowns, and supported livelihoods. But imagine that years of warming waters, overdevelopment, neglect led to the degradement of these natural barriers that Mother Nature put there for us. That local knowledge had also vanished, with universities stopping teaching those critical skills needed for aquaculture and coral restoration and sea urchin farming. That's Puerto Rico today. They're tackling that past. The people of Puerto Rico didn't give up. They faced with those climate risks and rising seas, they set out for an ambitious goal. Let's restore and regrow our reefs, not just by importing expertise, but really making sure that they've got local ability to do this. In my role at FEMA, I had the opportunity to visit some of these nurseries for corals and sea urchins and meet the people really investing in the restoration of 5 miles of coral reef off the San Juan Bay, funded 100% by FEMA and HUD, the federal government, but with the passion, know-how, and expertise of the people of Puerto Rico. These are just several stories that if you start to think about it as an imagination of what might be, could seem a long way off. But the reality is, and this was truly one of the things I felt most blessed for in my role at FEMA, was I got to go through all around the country, visit other nations, and seeing just some of those truly bright spots that are happening every single day as cities become those centers of resilience that their people need them to be. And there was a couple through lines in all of the places that I've visited and all the amazing projects that I've seen. Across cities, certain principles are actually very consistent. The efforts around resilience building they center people. They also address injustice, not just infrastructure. They're setting out to adapt in real time because even though risk information and climate science has improved in leaps and bounds, we are still actively learning about the future that is coming our way and how we need to be equipped to confront it. In these cities, people are building across divides. They're looking at who's maybe going to be left behind and making sure those voices are part of things. And they're also thinking generationally, not just in election cycles. And that's a big shift in terms of how we really cultivate community resilience. So these aren't just slogans, they are strategies. They are things cities that are doing, not because it's easy, because none of this is easy, but because it's urgent and important. And so in today's conversation, I'm gonna turn it over to back to James so we can get all the voices in the room. I want us all to be thinking about, what does this mean for us? What does it mean for us as individuals, as families, as we head into heat season now? If you are in a place where you notice that one of your neighbors doesn't have air conditioning, you could be their cooling option. So there's something we, each of us has to do. In the community where we're residents, what more can we do? You may be here because of your jobs and the professions, and that's where you found a lot of your purpose when it comes to resilience. What more can you do? So that's really, I think, our hope for today's conversation, is that we can really celebrate what already is, give wind to those sails, but also use these next several years as that chance to recommit deeply to advancing on these issues that will never be easy, but are urgent both for today, but for our children's children. So thank you, and back over to you, James.
Oh, Victoria, thank you so much. I got chills multiple times through those stories of just yeah, you really led us along there, and to think these things are really happening is so inspiring. So thank you. Thank you for sharing those stories and rooting us in your personal story around it. I would love to invite Corinne and Olivia to come on camera as well. If we could clear the Slido chat so that we have some time now for everybody to ask some questions that might have come up for you as Victoria led us on that wonderful story and journey. I'll kick us off just while other people are starting to send their questions into the Q&A chat in Slido. Um, Something that you teed up and for me is always front of mind when I think about resilience is the social infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. And I think about how those aren't like, there's ways in which those are work with each other, and there's ways in which they stand alone. And I just wonder how each of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Victoria, how you think about that. Do you think, is there a priority to that? Is there a way you think about the connection between those? I just would love to hear your reflections, that kind of
Yeah.
social, physical aspect of this.
Absolutely. For me, and I think in the resilience work broadly, it's very people centered. And so I'll give you a quick example. Oftentimes, when I'm talking to folks who work in the utility and like critical infrastructure sector, and they're thinking about critical infrastructure resilience, it's very kind of built environment, right? And so
Mm,
it's very easy to be like, will this energy grid be able to be there and working and operating after a big storm? If you visited any place hit by a hurricane that has old building codes, you know that, and I saw this after Milton in Florida, the grid might come back up, but if the building codes in a person's home were old, they still flooded, they still couldn't use the power coming to their house. And so the conversation on like resilient energy supply has to be people centered, or the transmission lines and everything could be working, but the person that it's seeking to serve might be disconnected. And so when we center people and ask how infrastructure, how everything is in service of people, community, thriving economy, it leads to a different set of questions and considerations about how we actually define success. And so that's why for me the two are always very linked, because it's who
mm,
is this in service of and why, and
yeah.
that creates the holistic conversation. Whereas if you look at one asset, one piece of infrastructure in its singularity, it being resilient to itself is not the same thing as a community that is resilient.
I have to like the fun of where we are into the Future Friday series is there's been conversations we've had on the past session. So I hope everyone will bear with me if I bring some of these in, because community has shown up in all these topics, from economy and innovation and now resilience. And it strikes me that it is both a part of creating the solution, and it's who the solution is for. And in some ways that's so obvious, but like it's worth saying that like we don't put that in the front of this conversation enough. I want to bring in a question from the audience, and we can bring this to everybody. What role do you see resource management and the development of local circular economy workforce development in city resiliency? It's an interesting bringing something in from the area of circular economy and workforce into this conversation. I don't know if that strikes a chord with anybody that would want to speak to that relationship to resource management with this. Olivia? Go ahead, Corinne. Please, Corinne, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts, things that we are starting to see a lot of our clients and property owners thinking about, which is the idea of energy resiliency and making sure that our properties are insulated from risk. So not just making sure that we are working together as a community to increase grid resilience, but in the event that grid resilience goes down, especially if we're talking about critical facilities, hospitals especially, life-saving communities or community resources and facilities in the community, that is really critical that you have to have some sort of backup. And traditionally, backup power in those types of properties has been served by fossil fuels. We are entering an era where we're trying to get away from fossil fuels. We're trying not to rely on that. Those will not be available forever. How do we create a resilient energy infrastructure that is available locally, distributed locally to our properties? So that's something that I am seeing a lot of, which really ties into the local circular economy aspect and workforce development. Is we need people in those jobs. We need people who are skilled to construct those types of facilities, to do the installation. Those are really good jobs, especially as we see jobs transitioning from the fossil fuel industry to support clean energy and specific distributed energy that's local to a site.
I love that. That's a great point. This question of the scale, this system perspective of whether you have centralized, distributed. Olivia, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, nice to be here. Most of my work right now is with local governments, and we just did a session with a number of economic development leaders from across the U.S. together to talk about resilience and the role of economic development leaders in that space. And it's really interesting talking to them and in the vein of jobs and economy and workforce development and how resilience is perceived from that perspective. So like you talked about Houston, Victoria, and one of the macro vulnerabilities of Houston is their dependence on the oil and gas industry, and the disruption of that creates like major disruptions in their workforce and their economic stability. And just kind of zooming out a little bit from where government sits and thinking about the role of how it can kind of enable the community voice, or sometimes hinder the community voice, depending on where you are. Is just that's the perspective I'm kind of coming from. But I think in the workforce development piece, it's taking the economic viability of kind of your economic ecosystem and looking at what are we looking at for the future, right? I mean, resilience is really about the immediate impacts. It's about envisioning these kind of acute disruptions that happen. But it's also about planning for the future. I was maybe, instead of using the word resilience, depending on the context we're working in, where resilience isn't land, we talk about kind of future facing planning, right? So you're taking into account the vulnerabilities that you're anticipating. And so, I don't know enough. I think Corinne is the circular economy person here, but just in terms of workforce, it's just an important thing to be considering in your kind of economic development ecosystem in your cities too.
Yeah, and I want to bring in, there's a great kind of add to this conversation we're having that Catherine brought into the chat here, which says that talking about how community is so important made me think we need a National Meet Your Neighbor Day. Thoughts, how else can we promote neighborliness? And but the tie for me is that the word workforce implies kind of your job. And I heard Victoria, and we've already kind of resonated that this isn't just what you have to do 9 to 5 as a job. This is also how you show up in your personal life and how you have relationships outside of work that create that resilience. So First of all, yes, let's go make Meet Your Neighbor Day. But yeah, thoughts, maybe Victoria, you want to start on like,
Sure.
how does this show up outside of the job as well?
Yeah. So check your local community. Like National Night Out was really big in Oakland, where we would do block parties,
Mm,
and every city kind of has a different thing about it. So there may not be a meet your neighbor, but there might be something, right? But then it still
mhm,
requires uh community, and it still requires organizing. But you can start small, like here in DC right now, where I've been living since I came to the city for working for the Biden-Harris administration. We live in an apartment building. It had just been renovated. Community building can be as easy as we created a WhatsApp QR code and put it by the mailbox so that we can all be on there together in a group chat, right? And so there's
nice.
those little small, like, it doesn't have to be big. It can start really small. And then
Mm,
we had a backyard and they pitched us on a community garden, but there was none. And so it finally got built yesterday. And my 6 year old got to work with the 70-year-old to be the inaugural planters, right? So none of this has to be massive, but now we know each other. We know who's got babies on the way, who's got a medical appointment coming up and might need someone to look in on them. And so on the personal side, and even your daily life, like if you're involved in a school, a church, a this or a that, like those are all actually really important sources of social cohesion. And oftentimes I think many of us feel like our professional and our personal lives must live in these separate spheres, but we have strengths and things to contribute in both that really strengthen the other.
yeah. First of all, I'm totally stealing the WhatsApp QR code. And I also, I think for myself even, and for maybe for some listeners here, it's like, oh, I'm not a community organizer. And I think there's really something like taking the labels out and just like this can be small, it can be simple, it can be, just taking that moment to introduce yourself to the person that you know lives next to you, just hasn't happened yet. And that can lead to, like that drop in the pond, right? You never know who they're connected to and how that builds a larger ecosystem. Just bringing in comments from the chat here. I'm struck by your comments on first and last mile for energy distribution being similar to first and last mile for the transportation system. So that's a great addition to this, and that speaks to it's nice we're going different scales here. There's the personal connection, and now here we are talking again about this kind of the more system level changes that are needed. Um, so much more to get into here. I'm gonna take the moment for us to switch formats. So this has been traditional Q&A, and something we like to do on Future Friday is to make sure that everybody can be sharing their ideas. So I'm gonna ask us to clear the chat again, and we're gonna click over to the Ideas Cast. Now, for those that haven't joined us before, this is really, we want your ideas, we want your input, and our panelists are going to be joining me as we react and respond to your thoughts about this topic of resilience. We like to start you off easy. This is going to be a warm-up round, and we're doing this for the first time. We're going to do it as a word cloud. So you will see here that our first question is, what does resilience feel like? And if you, for those that are in Slido, you'll see there's a poll, and you can enter a word under the question, what does resilience feel like? And that's going to start to populate a word cloud for us so we can see your reactions to that. And I'll just tee up this question, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to share their thoughts. But I think the reason I wanted to start with this is because knowing that this work, it was actually Cristina Figueres who led the Paris Agreement that said sustainability is at once a personal and societal challenge and work. And I think that's so true for resilience as well. If we can't show up with a feeling of resilience, it's hard to make the connections to do the work of creating resilient systems without a personal feeling of that. So I'm seeing people are starting to respond in Slido, and if I may, I will start with Victoria, and then we'll go around the horn of what does resilience feel like for you?
Yeah, so for me, it's a number of things. One is knowing that knowing that there's a safety net, which goes to the ability to like withstand disruption, right? So the more our safety net is there, the more it's easy to just live
Mhm.
life, try and thrive, do what we want to do. I think another piece gets to things performing and our environment performing like we expect it to. And by that I mean like and I saw in the chat someone was asking about like what does a resilient house look like? There are things out there like I don't want my roof to blow away, so maybe I've got a fortified roof and I expect it to stay on in a big windstorm. Maybe I expect that like my neighborhood won't flood because I've got a good stormwater system. But there's some of these like basic expectations that we have that unfortunately are we're at a point where we really have to reinvest and do things differently so that they can those things that we think will be there for us. And again, it's both the social safety net and the physical safety net that so many different infrastructure systems contribute to. But I think those are two key pieces of it in terms of giving it the space, giving that sense of like personal and like family level resilience.
Yeah. How about you, Corinne?
Victoria stole my safety net idea, so I won't repeat that. But that was what really initially came to mind as sort of like the gut reaction of what does resilience feel like. But the other couple of things that come to mind are, the backup plan, like what happens if, and having that support around you, both in terms of you as an individual and a person within your community, but physically as well when it comes to infrastructure and our built environment. And more specifically, one of the things that that I was thinking about is the concept of redundancy, which we generally, like in most parts of our lives, redundancy is considered a negative thing. Like that's not a good thing. Like you don't want to be redundant. You don't want to have redundant, like at work, redundancy is generally not a good thing, right? But in resilience, redundancy is good. Like sometimes there's this tension sometimes between sustainability and resilience, right? That like it may not be the ultimate most sustainable thing to have a redundant element of a system. Like sustainability is about efficiency and operating. It can be about operating in a lean way and the most efficient way possible, using the least amount of resources. Redundancy in a lot of ways is contrary to that. But that's one of the distinctions and sort of like the tension and balance of resilience and sustainability is having enough redundancy that like what happens if this system goes out? What happens if the grid goes down? What am I going to do? Like how am I going to power that hospital, right? Like we've got critical equipment. What is our backup plan? It's that redundancy that I think is a really core aspect of resilience as well.
That's great. Olivia?
Again, kind of coming from, kind of city government, kind of systemic level thinking, I always think there's a certain kind of level of self-sufficiency and kind of, intelligence that goes on in city planning when you think about resilience. And I feel like in this era of dwindling systemic supports for government right now, that's going to become even more important, but that there's going to be kind of an ingenuity that comes out of that. And in the kind of the resilience parlance of infrastructure and investment, there's a lot of talk about kind of co-benefits, right? And this goes to sustainability too, like eking out a much benefit for as many aspects of that infrastructure as possible. And you can think of like, I worked in Tulsa. So for example, like they had flash flooding. It's not a coastal city, but they still had flash flooding, and they had like their ballparks would turn into catchment areas for water, right? But in the interim, they had all this grassy space for their communities. And something along those lines where somebody's just been really creative in thinking through what are the scenarios we're going to be facing in our future, and then how do we kind of construct our world in a way that allows for those impacts, but also allows like this wonderful benefit at the same time. I don't know if there's one word to describe that. That can I think what everybody was talking about only come from, I think, local people caring and community caring and inputting on how they can experience their built environment. But
yeah, it's a couple of things I heard. One of this like two things that seem conflicting can be true at once, right? We need efficiency and we need resilience. And I heard solution multipliers when we think about what that looks like, and I'm going to click us over to what that looks like. What that looks like is ideally things that we're investing in that achieve multiple ends at the same time. And it's not this kind of becoming macro or too focused, micro focused on one element of the system we're trying to create, whether it's efficiency or resilience. It's seeing the whole picture of how these things all should work together, as I believe. So let me move us right along. Again, I'm going to welcome to clear the Slido, and there'll be more. I will say for everybody, I love all the responses coming in Slido. It does say type your question, but I just want to give everybody permission to disregard that and type your ideas here. So we're using the Q&A section, but this is for your own thoughts as we move into really envisioning. And Victoria, you set us off on the path of success here with visioning this. And I kind of would love to do this almost as a speed round of just kind of what are some of those attributes? What are some of the things you see when you think of like cities that are resilient? We've heard some nature-based solutions in there. We've heard distributed systems. We've heard a robust workforce. Olivia, maybe I can start with you here to go back around the other direction of like when you envision that city that's resilient, what are some of those other features that are in that city?
I always think about, there's this, I was trying to think about this in advance, and there was this notion of efficiency, and I don't mean it to be kind of like in a spare sense, but when you take a city, and I'm a urban planner by background. Now I'm kind of working in municipal operations and governance and budgeting. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot in this space is just what do city governments and local governments have control over that they can leverage? And like one is like they have their own budgets and they have their own revenue tools. They also have land use laws, and they have ways of adjusting development patterns through their zoning. And this is, can be extremely contentious and depending on what's going on. And people are talking about managed retreat and these other very dramatic land use adaptations that have to happen. But I think there is an urgency to start being more efficient in using the resources that are controlled by the city government. So that's going to call into question like a budgeting thing, but it's also, I think, more importantly, going to call into question the land use. So in my mind, there's like, in my imagination, there's this kind of like, there's this just really smart and informed and creative land use pattern that happens. It probably is a densification, I would say. I live in New York, so everybody's like, don't say densification if you're not, we don't want to hear that from a New Yorker. Yeah, and I think a sense of justice too. I mean, I think there's a health, an inherent health to a resilient city that I think is really important. Victoria brought up justice, and I want to leave that off the table. Anyway, just spitballing a little bit, but those are the notions I have.
Those are great. Yeah, let's I'm seeing in the chat as well. I want to encourage everybody to continue Slido. Valerie shares here that social equity is critical in this conversation. We cannot highlight that enough. Corinne, what comes up for you? Just again, a kind of couple quick hits on this vision attributes.
Yeah, I was gonna, equity is a really big piece of this. I was thinking kind of along the lines of, coming back to something that Victoria said, is thinking about what, if you are part of an organization or you own a building or, you have some sort of role in the community, what are you in service of, and how can you be of service to the community? In what ways? Like, what is at your disposal? What is in your toolbox that you can use to be in service of the community? And I think that there's this element of cooperation and collaboration and serving something beyond your own needs. No one person, organization, neighborhood can be completely self-sufficient, can be completely on an island. Generally not today, right? So we need to rely on each other and have that network in place and the willingness to engage and to communicate and to work together and row in the same direction. One of the things that keeps coming to mind is in terms of climate resilience, I think one of the challenges with it, and I'm sure we'll probably get into this a little bit later, is that it feels like it's so far away sometimes, like, oh, that's a problem for 50 years from now. Like, no, it's not. But, it's a challenge that we as humans have with thinking about how to prepare now for something that we can't necessarily envision when it might hit, if it hits in our lifetimes. But I keep coming back to thinking about some of the responses during COVID, how, for example, I used to work in the post-COVID world for a retail property owner. So this example in particular comes to mind of retail property owners taking vacant suites in shopping centers and turning them into clinics or vaccination sites or testing sites. How can, like, that's a space that is otherwise not being used, like you're not making money off of it anyway as a property owner. How can you take that resource that you have and turn it into something that can be of service to the community? And just thinking about, like, beyond your own personal selfish needs, how can we work together collaboratively to elevate the entire community?
That's great. Yeah, the community is showing up in the chat here as well. And another theme I want to pull in from the chat is this dependence on ecosystem services, this using biomimetic principles and design. This element of nature is like critical to as a part of what this future of resilience looks like. Victoria, how about you? What comes to mind for this vision?
So I'll pull in a couple of threads that were mentioned by Corinne and Olivia. Um, One is, I think one theme we've heard is the importance of really like a resilient community, or cities, the center of resilience, being ones where like risk is well understood and done something about. And that is something that can happen today, right? And tomorrow. And there's very basic questions we can, no matter what you do, where you sit, you can be asking, like, is the office building that you're in or that you're building out one that is like, how long do you want it to last? 30 years, 50 years? How long is that hospital or school supposed to last? And there's probably like what the engineers say is the lifespan of that building, and there's how long you actually want it to last. And so I would go with what you actually want, right? And the reason I raise this example up is because it leads to concrete actions. Like I was in Kentucky a couple years back after some flooding, talking to a principal who was like driving people, his students, 2 hour, like picking them up 2 hours away from school, bringing them to the school, like a new location because their school had been flooded. And he was rebuilding the school in the holler in the exact same place. And he was putting all this energy into like getting kids educated until the school was rebuilt. And I asked him, I was like, if you knew that you were going to flood like this in 15 years, would you rebuild right here? And he's like, heck no, we would go somewhere else, right? And so I think that basic question of like being risk informed for whatever you care about, whatever you do, and then figuring out like what you can do incrementally, right? Like and there's so many incremental things, whether it's like a building that needs to be ready for extreme temperatures, which then if you do something about from like the from energy efficiency, from putting in insulation to then the energy grid stuff. Like, so I would say that's the number, like, if we could all start with like understanding the probable risks and like really maximizing what we're doing for ourselves, our neighborhoods, our ecosystems, etc., and reducing risk, the residuals, like there will always be something left, right? But it might be something we can withstand better. It might be something we can recover from better. It might be something that the right types of insurance will make it faster to recover from. But I think that's the number one thing I would say, is because it's so concrete.
Yeah, you're echoing in the chat this topic of awareness and knowledge around what to do. Shira made that comment. Also, Catherine, this question of community knowledge, and I love Catherine's framing on having the resources available so you don't panic, like having that plan in place. So it's a great segue because I want to move us now to really what the work is, how we do it, and I'll challenge us here to really try and prioritize that list. We've shown the breadth of all the things, and we've talked about the personal work you can do, the community work, the social, the physical, the policy work. There's a lot. There's a lot to it, and I think for sometimes the challenge here is where do you start? Like, where do we prioritize that action? So I wonder again. Feel free again sharing in Slido for those that are in the audience, but Maybe Corinne, I could start with you on this one. On if you had to prioritize and say, is it the policy work? What aspect of this should we prioritize right now to get to that vision we were just describing?
Yeah, I really think there are a lot of things that we could do. I think education is really key. There is, the data is still in terms of comparing climate science to and resilience practices to some other fields, it's still very nascent. And so if we as practitioners and specialists in this field are still navigating it, we have to then, by extension, think, well, what is the average member of our community? How much do they know? Are they aware? Are they educated? Are they informed? How do we reach those people to make sure that we are all working with the same basic knowledge set and aware of the risks and the benefits of taking action? I think that's really key to mobilizing around resilience and becoming more resilient to climate risk and other risks, is making sure that we're all aware and educated.
Is that just so, if I may, just to cut in, because Pamela in the chat here says an emergency alert system that reaches all citizens in all conditions with simple limit technology. Does that speak to the same thing you're thinking when you think about that? Is that kind of awareness education?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I moved I'm in the DC area. I moved from a jurisdiction in Virginia to a jurisdiction in Maryland about 3 years ago. And I know about this stuff, and it took me the longest time how to get my cell phone number on the emergency distribution list for my new county. Like, we need to make it easier. We need to be able to reach people more easily and to break down those barriers to basic information and access.
Yeah. How about you, Victoria? Top priority. Where's the work to focus on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that depends on who you are and where you sit. And so I noticed in the chat, we've got some folks who work for local government, right? And so for those of you who are in local government, there's so many important levers, whether it's things like ordinances and local regulations, because honestly, people are so busy, right? Like your average person, myself included, being a resilience practitioner, like our plates are full. And so having to think about another thing can be very cumbersome. And since I've been doing a lot of storytelling today, I'll give you one last little story on this, and why I think for cities, really looking at your regulations, your ordinances, your building codes, like making it super easy so that your residents don't really actually have to think about things. They just have to comply. Like there is actually power in that. My little sister who lives in the Bay Area, has 3 kids. She just had her 3rd kid, and she's in a town with like wildfire ordinances where you have to make sure your grass is like cut and you have setbacks of like the shrubbery. And she was getting nasty grams from the city of El Cerrito and also her insurance. And she just had her 3rd kid, right? So like finding that gardener to come put her yard in compliance was not top of mind. And so it was like big sister. I was like, okay, I'm here for 3 days to meet my new niece, and I will also find a gardener to put you back in compliance with your local ordinance, right? But she wouldn't, it's not that she's anti wildfire prevention. She totally gets it. Like, and is like a champion, but so much was happening in life, and so much is happening in life for so many of our residents, that there is actually power in that combination of like regulatory ordinances mixed with like insurance companies who also have an incentive to make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's all, like, I think on the city side. And then on the business side too, time and time again, I've seen publicly funded projects that actually create so much value for the private sector. And the public sector is just trying to fund certain things, whether it's turning parks in, like in Tulsa, like you were mentioning, one of you was mentioning, into flood retention areas. Like there's business districts that are protected. There's real estate assets that are protected. And so I think the other one is to all get comfortable both zooming out to figure out how we create shared value. And the more shared value we identify, the more co-benefits, that resilience value that I talked about at the beginning, we can unlock, and we can figure out how to finance it. The whole kind of different things will be investable for some people, some things will be philanthropic, some will be private. But the more we understand the systemic big picture solutions that we're all contributing to, I think we can really do more. And that's what I think this next several years really is an opportunity for, with less federal dollars, is what are all those other levers that weren't federal grants, and let's maximize that by really partnering and investing together differently.
That's so important. I want to keep us moving. Olivia, I'm going to start with you on this next one since we didn't get a chance to hear from you on that. But this is really along the same vein, but it's giving us this kind of, I want to just help us move towards these really practical, clear, like this is what's working right now. And here's what we could do more of to build on those successes. So I feel like we've shared some good ones there, but I wonder if there's other examples you have from your seat, and we'll go around the horn again on what can we just replicate? What's the success that we can build off of right now?
Yeah, I mean, but honestly, I struggle with this replicability and scalability question sometimes because of all the benefits and strengths of what we're talking about, of this hyper local understanding of problems.
Okay.
And in my experience, when, especially with the 100 Resilient City program, which was this grand experiment in scalability, deploying a framework across the whole world, 100 cities, and it works to the point, and then you encounter local budgets, local government, and then it was like, so I think that there's definitely kind of, I think in the domains of the spaces that I live in are kind of like governance and resource and law, right? And regulatory spaces of local government. And it's not that evident always to replicate across in the government space. I think there's definitely design elements that work. Obviously, we can learn from, and I think there's community engagement models that are more successful. I think the other thing that that I also observe being a difficult thing for local government, and Corinne touched on this, is just we are becoming more data rich. I've never seen more incredible data sets on climate, on like visualizations, data, if they're free, they're like, but it's still very difficult for the public to truly internalize and digest that, as well as for local government, especially like budget offices. And I mean, the planning departments can. So in terms of solutions, I just feel like I'm observing this gap, and it's be really great to help facilitate. And Corinne and Victoria both talked about education and risk informed. The translations need to be everybody needs to be brought along a little bit more. And we have the data is emerging, but how do we kind of make it more so that everybody sees themselves in that data? And how can the governments uptake it a little bit more so that it's informing their tactical resource planning on land and budgeting? Because it's still, they look at it and they're like, they can see that, but it's like hard to, internalize it. So I think there's something there in terms of risk information and data. I'm not sure.
It's fantastic. And I love how you reframed the question, because it's so well taken, right? This is not a copy paste exercise. This is like, what does scaling look like is hyper local. And yet we have enabling conditions that can help us do that adoption and scaling perhaps more rapidly or better. So I love that perspective. Corinne, how about you? However you want to take that question of impact.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts, especially following on what Olivia was saying. And this is specific to where I work in the commercial sector, but I think is still applicable across residential and government. One of the things that we've seen a lot of over the last year is as this data becomes more accurate, more accessible, more usable, we've seen a lot of commercial property owners and occupiers, tenants who rent space in commercial buildings, wanting to understand their risk, their exposure from climate hazards over various time horizons. And one of the reasons why, I mean, it's obvious. I think this is the part where it's like, it's self-serving, right? That they're trying to eliminate their own personal, organizational, company risk and the dollar value associated with that. And I think what we're able to do now that we haven't been able to do until more recently is not only understand expected risk and exposure, and as well as the vulnerability of our physical environment, but actually translating that into a dollar value, and using that to make decisions about how we can get financial support and get decision makers to sign off on some of these big ticket items by understanding, well, if you don't do this big ticket item, it's only a matter of time before you're going to incur an even bigger loss. And that's a gamble, of course, right? And so we're seeing a lot of our clients wanting to understand the data, wanting to understand the dollar value that is at risk in the future to be able to justify some of the investment that might be required. We're even seeing, interestingly, on the tenant side, so a tenant has, in most cases, has limited control over the building that they occupy. But we're seeing tenants want to understand the risk, because if the building that they occupy, even if they don't control it, they don't control the decisions that are made to make, fortification efforts on it. If the building is damaged in a climate crisis and natural disaster, that affects the tenant's ability to operate, and that affects their business bottom line. So there's still incentive for them to spend the money to understand this, to bring that to the property owner and say, we've done this study, this is what we found, how can we work together to make these improvements? So that's really something exciting that I think that can be applied in the future at government and hopefully eventually residential scale, is having the dollar financial impact and much better understanding that, so that we're not waiting until it's too late and now we've just, now we need to spend millions of dollars to repair when we could prevent it.
Well, and I'm hearing, but part of what you're talking about in scaling there is more people having the conversation and having a more sophisticated conversation as part of scaling. Victoria, we are running low on time here, but I want to bring you into this, and then we'll head into a wrap up.
Sure. I think the only additional thing I would add to how we reach scale is having those data-driven conversations about how we pay for things. And we've had an approach where resilience is a public good, and so there's been an expectation that either it's going to be paid for out in the future sometime, or it's going to be bonds and debt that our children's children pay back eventually, or something else, right? But the cost of inaction is so high. So I think that conversation around, like, how do we do this together? How do we finance? How do we invest? How do we create value? Where could we get more value from something that exists so that we can offset the cost of really reducing risk? Like, those are those hard conversations that just require everyone to, like, I still have young kids, but like we still play cards with like everything face up so you can see what everyone's cards are. So it's, in some ways, it's like, let's play, like, we got to play the game with the cards face up so that we can help each other. Like, the goal isn't for one person to win, it's for all of us to win. And so we have to, like, have those hard conversations too, even if it means I'm going to take your queen, like, put your queen to, we're playing Sleeping Queens in my house right now. Like, even if it means I'm going to put your queen to sleep, like, we're having a conversation about it and we're figuring it out. So I think that's the piece I would add, because even in Corinne's example of tenant and landlord, we dealt with that in Oakland with seismic retrofits to soft story apartment buildings. Displacement today in a housing crisis, or displacement tomorrow after a 7.1, who shares the cost of making those upgrades? So that's really the juggernaut that we have to solve.
I love ending on that idea of, let's all play the game with our cards facing up. We have to work together to get this done. This is about all of us being more resilient, expanding the connection. Thank you all so much. There's so much wisdom, so much insight. I love all the personal sharing, the storytelling, the way we covered this topic, from that neighborly action to all the way up to the policies and the financing conversation. So on virtual, I'm sad we don't get to give a huge round of applause, but a virtual round of applause to our panelists, to all of the people in the audience sharing their great ideas as well. Please, if you enjoyed this, spread the word and come back next month. It's not the first Friday of the month, because that's July 4th. So we're going to be the second Friday. And we are talking about opportunities for affordable housing, as something very personal, near and dear to my heart, is where I started my career. So the conversation continues, and you'll, for those that have continued to come back, and we love the repeat visitors, you'll see how all this continues to tie together. Here's our contact information to reach out and learn more. Time flies when we're having fun, but finally, just again, thank you for helping us reimagine a more optimistic, beautiful future of cities. Happy Future Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and stay well. Thank you.